Hey folks, Nick Jennison for Thinking About Guitar. Today we're taking a look at a fuzz from our friends at Kernom. This is the MOHO. Now the MOHO is an analog augmented fuzz, and what that means is that it's an analog fuzz with digital control, and in essence gives you just about every fuzz tone you could ever conceive of, and several that you've probably never thought of before. Within this stylish, very rugged and diminutive little box, we have everything from early broken amp type fuzz tones through to vintage 60s psychedelia, 90s grunge tones, modern explosive fuzz sounds, ring modulators, low octaves, high octaves, you name it. In addition to this, we also have the ability to use presets. We can use MIDI to control the parameters on our MOHO. We can also use an expression pedal to blend between our preset and the WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get settings on the top. It's a lot to take in. So before we go any further, let's take a listen to how the MOHO deals with some classic fuzz tones. So now that we've heard a whole bunch of sounds from the MOHO, let's take a closer look, starting with the top panel. Now right here on the front we have two foot switches, one to engage and disengage the pedal, another to switch on our stored preset. Now you can actually store a whole bunch of presets via MIDI. This is just one readily accessible stomp preset. So if you have a favorite fuzz that you go to all the time, you can hit that, resting assured that your settings have been saved. They're not going to be affected by the front panel knobs. Saving your preset is very easy too. If you want to set it up and save your preset, just a matter of setting the knobs how you like them and holding this control, and then you are good. But we can also use this as a WYSIWYG pedal, i.e. what you see is what you get. If you're sort of a more traditional pedal user, maybe you're intimidated by MIDI. You shouldn't be. MIDI's quite simple, but even still, let's take a look at the knobs that we have. So the obvious ones to begin with are on the outside edges here. We have volume and we have fuzz, and these are positioned so that you can control them with your foot if you so desire. If you need a bit more volume or a bit more fuzz, you can easily run your foot along the side of this control and get a little bit more or less of the control that you want. Now, the deeper controls come in the form of the pre and post tone. Now these are essentially filters, and they're quite complex. They go much farther beyond your typical kind of high and low pass filters. They're very complex, but they essentially give you the ability to sculpt the sound and the feel of your fuzz by driving more or less high end into the fuzz, which is a little like turning your guitar's tone control up and down, and in turn sculpting the overall frequency response on the back end. So this is going to enable you to control the feel of the fuzz With the pre-tone, it does have some influence on things like gating effects too. The post-tone is going to be there to give you the overall tone shape or the overall EQ shape that you want, and also to allow you to match it to a bunch of different amps. Now, the really interesting controls up here are the mood and electricity controls. The mood control is really what governs the way the Moho sounds in terms of what kind of fuzz it's going to sound like. And it's divided into 5 little segments. The first segment over here, this first third, you might think of as the vintage fuzz section. So here we have early fuzz controls in this first little fifth, which go from kind of almost no fuzz at all, just a little bit of kind of germanium-esque breakup, through to broken amp and Velcro kind of sounds. That gives way in the second segment to 60s psychedelia. So think tone benders, fuzz faces, etc. When we get a little bit further up and we get into this top segment up here, we're into grunge tones. So that's big muffs, if you want to think about it in those sort of terms. Now, obviously, these are trademarks, so we can't come outright and say it's a big muff, but to you and I who are using the thing, think big muff. And there is a sweep here. So fuzzes are traditionally very simple circuits, and there is quite a lot of commonality between them. So the ability to sweep this and get somewhere between, say, a fuzz face and a big muff, that's really cool. But it goes much further than that. As we start to get into this fourth segment, we have a much more destructive and modern sounding fuzz, which does start to glitch out when we get all the way up at the top. So we have kind of glitchy sounds way down here for thin, broken, glitchy tones, and then big, fat, blown out tones over at this end. And when we get to this fifth segment, this is where the ring modulator lives. Now, the ring modulator is going to allow us to create all sorts of walls of fuzzy noise, either by playing a guitar and the ring modulator kind of doing its thing around that, or just by letting the pedal self-oscillate. So you can even set your guitar down and make all sorts of crazy noises here. Now, these will be influenced by the position of the fuzz control and the pre-tone in particular. That's going to determine exactly what the ring modulator does, as is the electricity control, which we're going to get to in a second. But you might think about this as a mix control. So when it's set just on the very brink of the ring modulator section, we only have a little bit. As we start to turn it up, the ring modulator becomes much more prominent in our signal. Now, this leads me to the electricity control. So in the ring modulator setting, this is going to control the oscillation speed. Basically, it's going to control how high-pitched or how low-pitched those oscillations are, again, influenced by the pre-tone and the fuzz. But when we're in a slightly more normal fuzz setting, the electricity functions as an octave control. And when you turn it to the right, it's an Octavia style octave up. Really, really valuable sound. Now, this is super cool because you can get it way down in the low range of the vintage fuzz section and create that, for want of a better word, that tentacle type sound where it's just the octave. It's like the Octavia part of the Octavia without the fuzz part. That's a super cool sound. We can also turn it to the right and get some monophonic low octaves. Think about those kind of sub-synth kind of fuzz tones that we have. It has its own kind of character here as well. It doesn't always behave itself, which is nice, because if we want a clean octave, we can reach for a pog or something like this. This kind of low, subby, unpredictable octave, for me, really valuable creative tool. And how much of it we blend in is going to be determined by the electricity control. Now, that is a lot to take on board. So let's do a slightly more forensic examination of what's going on here. We're going to point all the controls north, and we're going to begin by taking a listen to the influence of our mood control. We're actually going to do this with 2 different amplifiers, and we're going to begin with a clean amp, and we're going to use some humbuckers all the way through this just to keep it nice and consistent. But we'll turn our mood control to various positions where it starts to really influence the feel and character of our fuzz, and we'll listen to how that sounds through our clean amp. Then we'll do another test, which will be very similar, but through a dirty amp. First, though, let's do clean. Next up, let's do the same test but with a gold panel British amp to see how well the MOHO holds up with a dirty amplifier. In this instance, I'm going to be manipulating the volume and fuzz controls because it might get a little bit out of control if I'm not careful with those, but I'll keep the pre and post tones set true north. Electricity is going to be in the center notch position, which means no octaves just yet. We'll get to that in a second. Let's explore the effect of our mood control, but this time with a dirty amp. Next, let's do an examination of the electricity control. And once again, I'm going to creep my way through the mood control. Will not be quite as forensic about each individual position, but I do want to see what the low octave and the high octave do to our sound. This is going to be particularly interesting when we get to the ring modulator section, when this is going to control the oscillation. Let's go back to our clean amplifier and take a listen. And last but not least, let's take a look at the effect of our pre and post tone controls. This is going to enable us to dial in a more aggressive sound by turning the pre-tone to the right. It's going to tighten things up. Similarly, we can blow things out and have that almost tone control turned down type fuzz with the pre-tone turned to the left. And of course, the post-tone is going to shape the overall EQ curve as opposed to the feel of the fuzz. Again, I'll be a little free and loose with the settings here, but let's take a listen to the impact of the pre and post-tone on various positions on our mood control. Again, with a clean amp. Let's have a listen. So there you go, folks. That's been a look at the Kernom MOHO. And for me, this is an absolute home run. Now, I'm already a big fan of the Kernom Ridge, which is lurking over my shoulder, and the MOHO delivers in a very similar fashion. It gives you access to basically every fuzz sound you could ever conceive of. You can do the thing where you let the pedal do its own thing and self-oscillate and create walls of noise. It can be glitchy, it can be fat, it can be full, it can do 60s tones, 90s tones, you name it. But in addition to this, it's also capable of a great deal more, let's say, utility than a traditional fuzz pedal. It doesn't get upset by active pickups. It's immune to buffers, which is super cool. You can control it via MIDI. You can control it via an expression pedal. You can save presets. It's super robust. It doesn't get upset by heat. It doesn't get upset by power that's maybe 9.1 volts instead of exactly 9 volts on the dot. You don't need a special kind of battery to run it, but it will do all of the things that the fuzz pedals we love will do. And if you're a fuzz fan like me, this is an absolute no-brainer. Once again, this is the Kernom MOHO. My name's Jennison, Thinking About Guitar. I'll see you next time.